Good evening. My name is Gurnam Singh, and I'd like to welcome you to a very important, very special Sikh Think Tank show today on Punjab Broadcast Channel Sky 776, which will be watched across the world on various platforms, on Sky, on YouTube, and live on Facebook as well. So please do share, let your friends and networks know. Today's discussion is going to be on the increasing issue of far-right violence that has engulfed the UK over the last few days. Recent events in Southport following the tragic killing of 3 young girls, BB King, who was 6, Elsie Stancombe, who was 7, and Alice Oga, who was 9, have brought this issue into sharp focus. And in the aftermath of these heartbreaking deaths, protests have erupted across the country, some of which were co-opted by far-right groups, leading to violent clashes and heightened tensions. The phrase "a week in politics is a long time" is widely attributed to the then Prime Minister Harold Wilson. He reportedly made this observation to underscore the rapid pace at which political fortunes and situations can change. And it's certainly the case that this last week has been tumultuous. It's been phenomenal, the kinds of issues that have come up and the agenda that it's creating. Having secured a landslide victory, the new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has had possibly the shortest honeymoon of any incoming leader in recent history. The death of the 3 children became the touch point for rumours and speculation, and social media is awash with fake news stories linking the killers to a Muslim asylum seeker. And in fact, it was because of this misinformation that the person involved, who was technically legally a minor at 17, his name was disclosed by the judge. The suspect is the British-born Axel Rudakubana, who identifies with Christianity. So all the information that was put out was completely fabricated. And he has been charged with multiple counts of murder and attempted murder. But if we just kind of trace the developments over these last week or so, it's like wildfire. On the 30th of July, as I say, after the stabbings took place, there were initial protests and violence. A vigil of victims in Southport escalated into violence, with a mosque being attacked by a group believed to be supporters of the now defunct English Defence League. And this marked the beginning of a series of far-right protests. On July the 31st, the spread of misinformation, mostly through social media, about the attacker's identity and nationality and religion fueled further unrest. Far-right groups exploited this misinformation to incite further violence. And on the 1st of August, the protests spread away from Southport to other cities in the UK. Demonstrations and riots occurred in cities including Manchester, Hartlepool and Aldershot. And these protests were consistently targeting migrants, involving significant violence and damage to property, and also targeting the police as well, and accusing them of defending migrants. The other important narrative has been the way in which Muslims have been in particular identified as being the target group, and we can explore some of this as well later. August the 2nd, continued unrest spreads to Sunderland, where a police station was set on fire. And protests continued in multiple cities, with police and counter-protesters clashing in Liverpool and other areas. And then we tragically and horrifically, really shamefully, on the 3rd of August, far-right protesters again clashing with the police, and counter-protesters across various locations actually set fire to a library in Liverpool, a library that was a community library that was doing amazing service. And on the 4th of August, the escalation of violence went another stage further. And some of these so-called protesters, rioters, attacked buildings housing migrants, such as the Holiday Inn Express in Rotherham and Tamworth. And further violence was reported in Middlesbrough and Bolton, where, again, residential areas, particularly where allegedly migrants were living, were attacked and windows being smashed. So the 5th of August, we see the government response really ratcheting up, and Prime Minister Keir Starmer convenes an emergency Cobra meeting with police leaders to address this unrest. The arrests continue as the government tries to control the situation. Also, the owner of X, previously known as Twitter, Elon Musk, has been stoking up flames by suggesting the UK is on the verge of some kind of civil war. And he's also allowed the likes of Stephen Yaxley Lennon, better known as Tommy Robinson, to spread his propaganda on the X platform, which previously he was banned. In fact, it's said that he has now nearly 900,000 followers. And this brief timeline highlights the rapid escalation of these protests and the kind of misinformation that's been spread. As I said, the events have sparked tough fear and concern amongst all communities, but especially Muslims and ethnic minorities, visible ethnic minorities. There is some rumor as well that anti-Semitism is also now being raising its head by these same so-called protesters. And I think that these attacks have really challenged our sense of collective responsibility and security. What is it to be British, and what is it to be have a responsibility to fellow citizens? Tonight we're joined by an expert panel of who is going to help us to really do a deep dive into some of the antecedents and the history of far-right violence in this country, and some of the kind of factors that are kind of really prevalent in this contemporary moment in British history. And we will delve into the root causes, look at some of the social, political climate, look at the role of social media, but also the suggestion that somehow what we're seeing is an alienated white underclass, a white working class, who feels that government has really abandoned them, and that their genuine maybe concerns are being hijacked by far-right extremists. And we will explore to what extent that is the case, and as well as examining the response of the police and policymakers. So I'm going to welcome our guests now, and then we'll get on with the discussion. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Dr. Stephen Cowden. Stephen, thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me on.
Yeah. So Dr. Cowden is a social work academic at Gloucester University. His work has focused on anti-racism and the issue of violent extremism and government policies around that, particularly around prevent and other policies. He has a PhD in English literature, in which he studied the effects of colonialism in Australia, his home country. We also have Dr. Savi. Dr. Savi is a broadcast Savi Aurora. Savi, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Yep. I mean, if I start to give your CV, it'll take all evening. So I'll just, in summary, he's a broadcaster, podcaster, documentary maker, and an award-winning digital media pioneer. His day job is as a consultant in organizational change, and he has a PhD in organizational behavior. He's also author of many books on management, though he's also written about the 1984 Sikh genocide in India. And last but not least, we've got Dr. Satkaran Singh Shergill. Sat, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, and so he's a proper doctor. The other are just kind of doctors of a different. He's a proper doctor, a useful doctor, if you like. He's a medical doctor, and he's a activist, social activist, and he's done a lot of work around caste-based violence as well. And I know that he's going to be, bringing in some really important insights. So, Stephen, I'm going to start with you, partly because of your own historical kind of work in this field. In the 1970s, we had Enoch Powell talking about the rivers of blood and the River Tiber boiling. And today we have people like Nigel Farage and even Elon Musk making similar kind of apocalyptic kind of comments. How is what was happening in the 70s similar or different to what's happening today? So a bit of a historical perspective.
That's a really good question to ask. And it's very important to remember, those of your listeners who were in Britain in the late 60s will remember this. Enoch Powell made this appalling, inflammatory speech. It is saying that rivers of blood would flow, because of the problems caused by Commonwealth immigrants into Britain. Yeah. Now, he was sacked by the then Prime Minister Edward Heath for saying that. Yeah. But of course, that was an inflammatory speech which led the National Front to cause vicious, provocative marches through black areas, black Asian areas in Britain, where they would literally, attack and assault, citizens. But the significant thing is that Heath, who was the Conservative leader, drew a line under that and sacked him. Now, if you think of Suella Braverman and the speech she made, for example, the speech to the American Enterprise Institute, where she talked about the West is facing an existential threat, truly colossal, quote unquote, numbers are trying to get into Britain. This is, what happened as a result of that speech, which has the exact same language and content of Powell's speech. What happened? Nothing happened. She was allowed to continue as Home Secretary. Yeah.
But the irony is that she comes from an ethnic minority. It's not, I mean, that's a big difference between Powell and her.
Absolutely. And I think this is the thing that has perplexed many people. How is it that you've got someone who is from an ethnic minority herself promoting the views of the extreme right? Yeah. How do you make sense of that? And I hope that's an issue we'll touch on tonight.
We definitely will.
But the key point I would underline is that the violent thuggery rampaging across British cities and terrifying people. And you have to remember what's happened. We've had, I heard just from talking to friends, a black woman in Bristol attacked with bricks as she left her workplace, which was an NHS hospital. These kind of random attacks, they have happened because people in positions of power and responsibility have nurtured these ideas, empowered the people we now see rampaging across British cities.
But what you seem to be saying, Stephen, is that there's a big important distinction between the 60s and the 70s. You mentioned Heath and this notion of the one nation Tories, yeah, and some kind of ethical conservatism and the kind of virulent right wing kind of attacks on the other. Now, the point I'm kind of want you to maybe touch on is how is what's happening now different to then in terms of the organisation of the far right? We know that there was a National Front in those days, the British National Party, and there were obviously some white supremacist groups. Are we seeing the morphing of the same groups now, or are we seeing something quite different?
I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, I think one of the crucial differences is the role of social media. Yeah. And the role of social media.
We will pick that up in a minute. I'm going to ask Savi for that because that's his. But I want you to just comment on the organisation because you've been looking at far right groups, yeah? I mean, we talked about Tommy Robinson. I mean, is that it? Is it Tommy Robinson's just kind of sparking all these wild, kind of alienated white young people to kind of riot, or is there something much deeper?
Okay, so I would say there's a much deeper ecosystem of right-wing views, which exist online, which exist in the sort of dark corners of the internet, but they also exist in the public sphere and in the mainstream press. The arguments from the Daily Mail, the Sun, and the Telegraph actually reinforce the arguments that are made by the more extreme groups.
Okay.
We've seen the connection. So there's a whole wider right-wing ecosystem which has existed and has been growing for many years. What we've now seen is that move into the offline world, the online.
Well, let me take that point to Savi because this is his kind of expertise. So Savi, Stephen's suggesting that clearly in the 70s and 80s we didn't have social media. There were right-wing newspapers who were, putting out some of that bile, but it was only reaching a particular kind of audience. But it seems like what we're seeing now, and you've got Elon Musk really kind of being a kind of cheerleader for this as well. What's going on?
I have to say that products like, and I call them products like TikTok, or even the traditional X, previously known as Twitter, they don't really have a sense of verify. And the term that I've used in some of the books that I've written about this phenomenon is something called the attention economy. Everybody wants that dopamine fix. Everybody wants that 30 seconds. There's impatience everywhere. And unfortunately, that leads to misinformation. Now, the BBC have got a very good service called Verify. Now, we know the American system in terms of the election going on at the moment, eventually in November.
Do you think those young
a lot
thugs are going to be looking at the BBC Verify before they take to the streets?
This is my point. The fact is they're not looking at that. They're getting their dopamine fix. It's been exacerbated by misinformation. And maybe there's a responsibility, and this goes into the borders of freedom of speech or inciting hatred, right? So can you have both? Well, there is, in my view, a clear distinction between inciting hatred and freedom of speech, right? Where it borders on blasphemy. Now, and even in one sense, if we go to a separate topic about blasphemy, why is it that blasphemy in the Christianity world is very different to blasphemy in the Islamic world, right? Let's bring it back to the verification bit. No one's interested in the facts. They're interested in sudden hits, the dopamine fix. It's fueled by misinformation. And if you look at some of the videos that are going around, you get a little message on WhatsApp that says forwarded too many times. This means it's reached that limit of, pushing out that image, that misinformation, which is causing that riotous effect offline.
What about Stephen mentioned, Suella Braverman? We had Priti Patel before her. We've had Nigel Farage, and of course Trump on the other side of the pond. And some people say that if America catches a cold, then sooner or later it kind of comes over here. Is this a Trump factor? Is this people being inspired by Trump and Elon Musk? Is that it?
I think it's the word encouraged. I think suddenly the gates are open. You can say whatever you want under the guise of, it's my right to say whatever I want. But, there has to be a limit. And then, we don't want to go down the 1984 George Orwell route, do we? In terms of the listening police controlling what you say or manipulating a population. This is the problem in terms of having the balance between what is actually politically correct to say. And if you mention the Suella Braverman situation, clearly, if you analyze what she was saying, it was very hurtful and there was a lot of misinformation. There are no real facts. So the Office of Statistics needs to issue that information. How many migrants are there? And I sent you something just before the program, which was talking about the decline in terms of migration numbers that are unfortunately coming over in boats.
And it's not as if Southport is full of migrants, So Belfast, it's got a tiny migrant population. So the numbers aren't the issue. There's something deeper. One last point before I go to South Cadden. We're talking about the role of social media. We're talking about misinformation. But do you think that these young people, if they're just kind of like dopamine fixes, could it be that they're not really racist? They're not really racist deep inside them, that we need to understand them better. That's one point. And the other one is this. You talk about George Orwell. The Prime Minister and the police talking about using facial recognition systems in order to catch the culprits. Now, we're into a kind of catch-22 here, aren't we? Because we want them caught, but then that opens the kind of gates for the George Orwell kind of, world, really, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's what I say is that politically we need to release the information from the official authorities that have that reliable data, right? And when it comes to Verify, yeah, you're right. Maybe the other problem is no one's interested in reading the BBC Verify site before they go and read the information. But maybe there's a responsibility from the social media companies to not control, but to actually go through another stage before they realize that this mass attack, because it is mob violence, it's almost like lynching. If you've read To Kill a Mockingbird, you'll know the lynching that was actually going on there. And that was all misinformation, but it was information being traveled within the same village to lynch that one individual who was innocent, right? So unfortunately, innocent people get hurt, but there does need to be an element of control, and it does not help if you've got people like Nigel Farage or Elon Musk saying certain things which in theory could be misconstrued, right? Because if you send a text message, you send an email to somebody, you can upset a family member, text and information can be misconstrued. Okay,
that's great. South, I'm going to come to you now. So we've been touching on some of the kind of factors there. What do you think are the primary kind of contributing factors? This clearly, we talked about social media, about misinformation. But these are pockets. These are relatively small numbers. It's not as if it's a revolution that somehow the whole population, a bit like what we've seen in Bangladesh. So clearly there are many other white British people, working class people, who are not drawn into these protests. In fact, some of them have been opposing them. So what is it about these young people? What are their kind of characteristics, do you think, that could explain this behavior?
First of all, I think we need to be clearer and understand that the face of capitalism and face of fascism is a bit distorted at the moment. What we need to understand, the face is shown as these thugs or these youngsters, or some people are claiming them, or they don't have TCSCs. That's the true identity of fascism. You cannot be more wrong. That would be bankrupt thinking, in the sense that that's the true face of fascism. Now, if you look at Nazis and the Nazi uprising of fascism when it happened in Germany, Mussolini's fascism that came in Italy, you gotta look at who funded them, who was behind them, who was there to help them to organize such protests, or let's say what it is exactly on the tin, terrorism across the streets. People and say this fascism. It's not. The real face of fascism is standing behind them and actually orchestrating this kind of events. And this is the first event that's happened across Europe. We've had some events in Poland. We've had some events in Bulgaria. We've had some events in France. We've had some in England. And to say that there's only a few hundreds, there's only a few bunches of people who are doing this. But the idea of this thing, if it's not good enough for me, if it's not good enough on mainstream media, we'll make sure we push it down in throats to understand that no, it's not the economical crisis that's causing the problem for your daily household problems. It's immigrants. That's what they're trying to push down the throats. And that's the rhetoric that's getting passed around everywhere. And if you look at the statistics, you look at evidence, for example, the Nazis and how they were funded. Ford, the car company, ITT, and also General Motors, they funded in millions of dollars. And not to mention that, the leaders of the USA and at the establishment of the United States of America between 1945 to 1975, in total funded Mussolini's uprising of their fascism and others and other agencies up to $75 million. So to say that these people are just coming out and doing random stuff, if you ask them, what is fascism? What is racism? They won't have a clue. And it's true. But that's not our enemy here. The enemy is someone else and some other groups. And we've already mentioned the individual who's kind of instigating this. Elon Musk himself coming across on Twitter and doing stuff. And the comparison between social media and mainstream media, I don't think social media, we could say that social media is not so true.
Just to qualify, I hope you're not saying that Elon Musk is a fascist, because then he's not here to defend himself. Okay?
I've not said that he's a fascist. What I'm saying is that his contradictions of words, where he's linked to his words, is kind of
well. He would argue that he's a champion of freedom of speech. That he wants
by buying a whole platform and controlling what you want to say, and then targeting other people.
No, he will allow you to say what you want to say. His whole argument,
having that much power.
But his argument is that we need to respect people's intelligence for them to make their own judgments about what they read and what they hear. Isn't that a bit patronizing for you to say that you can understand this, but somehow these other people can't? Isn't that in itself elitist?
No, absolutely not. They do understand certain things that obviously I understand, and also they understand what they are doing, and they are doing it for the sake that you and I would be angry. Yes, house prices have gone up, rent has gone up, cost of living has gone up. That's why they're angry. Most of the time, they're saying we can't get a job. Those are the reasons. But targeting that, it's the immigrants' fault. Who's instigated those kind of notions?
Okay,
and so that's what we need to look at.
I'm going to take that back to Stephen, because I think, again, this is probably territory that Stephen will be familiar on. Stephen, that seems to be saying that, three things, I think, what he's saying, if I could just summarize. One, he's arguing that we need to look deeper, both deeper into history, and that we do need to maybe, consider an international perspective, and that this is part of a pattern of right-wing the emergence of fascistic kind of ideology. That's the first thing. The second one is that these young people, or these people who are involved in the protests, many of them, have got genuine grievances around jobs, around health, around a sense of alienation, but that they're being maybe directing that in the wrong place. What's your what are your thoughts about that? I mean, is this, can we call this fascist violence?
I think definitely you can. Yeah, I think you can. Yeah, but I think I'm very much in agreement with the way Sat is looking at the issue. Yeah, we do have to look deeper. We can't simply see this as thuggery. These people are the front line. Yeah, but behind them, Sat is absolutely right. Those are the questions we have to ask ourselves. Who are the people who are funding and promoting this particular agenda? You know, if you look at these protests, you will see people saying, I can't get an appointment with my doctor. I can't get my children into the school that I want them to. I can't be seen at a hospital. Why is that? Because we have, in the UK, been cutting, disinvesting, creating huge levels of inequality. Yeah, this inequality is having a huge impact on the community. Now, what the extreme right is doing is trying to explain those frustrations, anger, suffering of people by directing people's anger at migrants. That's the whole thing. You're looking for someone to blame. You want to blame rather than think about or understand what is going on. Why is there so little funding for our health service? Why have we lost so many beds? Why have public services literally been run into the ground by the last three sort of Conservative administrations, but the last one in particular? Yeah? And there is a wider crisis in capitalism. There is a crisis of secure jobs. There is a crisis of pay and wages. You know, society's becoming more unequal.
What about the other? There is one. Yeah.
See.
So that's the economic. But let me just, again, I'm throwing this in there because we need to interrogate all the different kind of rationalizations. If you go in Holland and you see the kind of model panics around the rise of Islam, across Europe now we're seeing Islam being restricted. In some places they're talking about closing down mosques. Certainly in places like Holland they banned the hijab. Yeah. And that there is this. You said earlier on. I mean, one of the kind of hypotheses or the theories is this. I think it's Huntington's theory of the clash of civilizations. Now, there's somebody called Jordan Peterson. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's this kind of right-wing philosopher, psychologist, and he did actually a 2-hour interview with Tommy Robinson, and he's got millions of followers, and you know he is seen as somebody who's rational, who's logical, and so there's academics are also lining up to kind of offer some support to these kind of right-wing ideologies. So what's happening in our education system?
I mean, let's go. I think that Jordan Peterson is a very important person in thinking about these things. Let's go back to Sat's point. This isn't just about the thugs on the street, pernicious as they are. Yeah, this is also about the ideas that are motivating it. And this is where a lot of my research comes in. I look at the ideas that the extreme right promotes. And they have their thinkers and intellectuals. It's a mistake to think of them simply as a sort of a thuggish movement. There are people very carefully thinking through these ideas, writing books, explaining these things. Yeah, there's a resurgence of conservative thinking associated with right-wing think tanks like the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation nurtures these ideas and places their people within administrations. The Trump administration used to turn to the Heritage Foundation for its personnel. Yeah, the Heritage Foundation has also had an impact on British politics. So you're right to think about the international dimension of these. Yeah, our former commissioner for countering extremism, Sarah Khan, who was regarded as someone who did some important work, was replaced when Boris Johnson took power by a man called Robin Simcox, who was involved with the Heritage Foundation. So these right-wing groups place their people in key positions of influence. They're thinking not nationally, but internationally.
Yeah.
They've got their networks across Europe.
Savi, that's great.
Yes.
So I'm just on the ground, Savi, if we're thinking about what the kind of rhetoric that's coming out, particularly from Tommy Robinson, who seems to be somewhere, I don't know, in Greece, or he's in somewhere in a holiday resort in luxury.
He's a keyboard warrior, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a kind of orchestrating thing. And I've seen his interviews, and he talks about it's all to do with the Muslims and that the Sikhs are integrated, the Hindus are. He says the Sikhs are perfect citizens. Now, clearly, it's a divide and rule strategy. Yeah, he's driving a web, but he invokes things like grooming gangs, the kind of Muslim grooming gangs. He talks about Muslim extremists and terrorists, and quite a lot of migrant Sikhs, and I've seen them sharing some of this Tommy Robinson rubbish. So clearly, he's making significant inroad into this divide and rule strategy. How should the Sikhs respond to that? I mean, just remain silent and say, not my problem, Gov, or do we need to stand outside mosques and say, no, we have to defend the community?
It's an interesting point because you have Sikhs who are members of the Tory party. You've got Sikhs that are members of the Labour Party. You have Sikhs who are members of the Liberals.
And EDL. I mean, I think there were some Sikhs who were members
and
of
there's
EDL.
EDL as well. So this is where I go back to, people having an opinion versus, what is inciting hate. So if you look at his message, Tommy Robinson's message, it is clearly inciting hate, and the alliances that are being created are very mischievous, right? So I wanted to go back to the point that was being made by Dr. Stephen, which was about this rise of Nazism. The creation of the other is a very well-known way of divide and rule. You do that with the Jewish community, which they were very successful at doing, and the result is lining up the gas chambers and a major millions of people set of people and communities that were destroyed because of that. If you've ever read the book called the Tattooist of Auschwitz, you will see the horrors for sure about what was going on and the infliction of pain between this organization, the Nazis, who had created this sense of other. Now, in the past, it's been done with caricatures, for example, with images, when it came back to the fact that black people were really fighting for their rights. If you looked at some of the newspaper articles, the caricatures were made them to being non-human. So the more you do about creating a non-human entity, the less sympathy there is for them to be exactly the same as you, right? So this creation of other, this tiny manipulation which mushrooms into the fact that this is not a human, and once you stop thinking about a person and other as a human, you will start to commit atrocity.
Let me take that one, because I mean, clearly we're not seeing them playing the race science kind of card, which was clearly what the Nazis were doing. It seems to be around religion, around civilizations. It's the Huntington kind of clash of civilizations, and there's some sense that idea that Islam is a problem. It runs deep. It runs deep, and there are Islamists as well who actually, are playing into this. That in fact, some counter protesters, I don't know which town it was. It was Bolton, I think. Well, and they came out and they was going Allahu Akbar. So you've got these kind of idiots on both sides. I mean, there are fascists amongst Muslims. There are fascists amongst Sikhs as well, amongst other communities. So how do we deal with this kind of malaise? Particularly, what lessons can we draw from what Savi was saying about this notion of constructing the other? Because even the Nazis themselves, if you go back to the Nazi party, they didn't target the. In fact, they didn't even target the Jews originally. That came later in terms of the final solution. And they had some Jews. Now, I might get thrown out of the Labour Party of this, but they actually had some Jews who were actually, I'm not a member, by the way, but it doesn't matter, that were actually providing some kind of support for the Nazi early on anyway, in terms of them being populist. Yeah.
Well, there was a lot of industrialists also supporting the Nazi party initially.
The industrialists, yeah. Just like Elon Musk today.
So if we honest perspective, and we should actually look at it on a global scale. The country that we sit in right now, and we speak to each other from our and we speak. This country has been built on an empire which is really ruthlessly bloody. We do refer back to Nazis, and we do refer back to the Mussolini's, fascism. But the empire was also fascist, going around throughout the world, killing innocent people to just take up land, one by one. And even recent wars, like the Iraq War, weapons of mass destruction, and after killing more than 1 million people, and then afterwards declaring, oh, actually, there isn't any weapons. It's absurd, and it would be morally bankrupt thinking that this country right now are actively participating in one of the globalist genocide.
Yeah, but the West isn't a monolith, Sat, is it? The West isn't a monolith.
So,
we're part of the West, aren't we? We're part of the West.
Absolutely. And that's why when we look at that kind of structure, how the wealth was made for America and how the wealth was made for the United States, as well as the UK, I wouldn't be surprised that we are, as a nation, racist. That's the fundamental rule that we used to dehumanize India, dehumanize them. Oh, they're just people who can, play the flute and get snakes out of baskets. They're not civilized. Mm-hmm. Oh, the Africans are not civilized, and that's why we suffered, and that's why we're here. And a lot of people justify, oh no, but we the Sikhs, we participated in the Second World War, we participated in the First World War. Why are we getting prosecuted in this such thing? We gave a lot to this nation. Not really. We were subjected to help. We wasn't even a part of our war. This was a European war, and they call it a world war. And, okay. And then we were forced to go to this war.
We haven't got time to go into all the detail of history, but I think you made a good point. Stephen, I just wanted to now ask you about one point, but also begin to think about the kind of the government's response and what else we can do. But just on the divide and rule issue, I think that it seems to be having. I mean, you mentioned Suella Braverman, you mentioned the Tory party and how they filled their front bench with people from different backgrounds, and then claimed that was evidence that they were not racist. So it's a pretty confusing picture out there at the moment, isn't it?
I think you're absolutely right, Gurnham. It is a very confusing picture. But I think what a lot of people don't realise, and this was very apparent in the last election, is the extent to which the ethnic minority vote particularly has become communalised. Yeah? Increasingly, ethnic minorities who as Sat and Savi have noted, who came to the UK, who rebuilt the UK after the Second World War, who play a crucial role in the UK's economy and workforce, have been othered. But equally, you are in a situation where the class interests that once were the dominant that views in those communities are now being replaced, and were quite significantly impacted on the last election. People were being encouraged in minority communities to vote first and foremost as Muslims, as Hindus, as Sikhs. Yeah. You can in some sense think of white nationalist politics of Nigel Farage and Reform and sections of the Conservative Party as a mirror image of that. Yeah? Yeah. You construct a victimized, excluded identity. You say we are being excluded as white people. This is exactly the argument that is being made by Elon Musk, that there's two-tier policing. The Black Lives Matter marches and demonstrations and protests were policed really softly, but our people are being policed much harder. It's a complete lie, utter misinformation, but they create this victimized identity. Yeah, and this is very much the way the extreme right works.
Stephen, I'm going to take a live call from the streets of Southall. I've got Gulwan Singh, who's from the Southall Defence Committee and also the Southall Youth Movement, and he was somebody who was involved, at the time to Blair Peach and Gurdeep Chugga. And so they're out actually on the streets now. And so I thought it'd be useful just to get a sense of what it's like. So, Gulwan, thanks for joining us today. And, I know that you are actually patrolling the streets. What's the kind of feeling like on the ground at the moment?
I beg your pardon. Let me correct you, Gurnham. I wasn't around in the 1976 riots. Number one, when Gadi Chagga got killed, I wasn't directly involved. Today, I'm not on the streets in Southall, but I'm behind closed doors, monitoring and networking with the police and community liaison officers, and monitoring what the situation is in and around our London area.
So what's the feeling on the ground? What is the tension in the air?
Well, there was we took it as scaremongering initially. We knew about it about 4 or 5 days back that these kind of things will sort of manifest, surface. However, we kept a low key simply because it's social media and exploitation. It's dirty politics, and we know that there's a minority, very, very minority, right? And we've seen it all before. And so in our neck of the woods, the boys have, particularly the Sikh boys, they've set up groups. Should we need to convene, there's a rendezvous point, different locations geographically, a good layout, roadmaps for us. Should anything happens, we'd have boys out in about.
Yeah, Kulwant, I remember last time when there were attacks on mosques, the Sikhs actually went to defend the mosques in Southall and Birmingham.
Well, we last scare we had, we were patrolling Hayes, Southall, 2 towns together, and we made sure the imams in the mosques, they knew, we're not going to run away from anyone. It was, look, it's a suicide for anybody even to think to come down to Southall. So it's just ridiculous. It's all hyped up stuff. No one ever going to come down to Southall.
And what do you say to those members of the Sikh community? I've had some WhatsApp messages from people saying, "Oh, Tommy Robinson is speaking the truth. These Muslim grooming gangs, Islam can't exist in Europe." I mean, what do you make of that? And some people falling for this kind of rhetoric.
Well, look, Gurnam Singh, given you're on a Sikh station, and we're Khalsas at the end of the day, right? We don't impartial. We look at human race as one race. Whether you're a Mozi, whether you're a Gora, Kala, Pira, it doesn't make no difference. If we see injustice happening on the streets where we are, we ain't going to let it happen. Full stop.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much for your. Thank you very much. Yeah. So I'm just going to come to you. I mean, Kulwant said there's lots of on the ground. There's solidarity amongst the communities, particularly in Southall. And I know that in parts of East London as well. I don't know which part of London you're in, but it does seem like that maybe this time round, the communities are standing together, and that these fringe elements will be isolated and identified, and perhaps even these so-called protests will fizzle out very quickly. What do you make of that more optimistic view that we get from Kulwant?
Is that a question for me?
Yeah, that's for you, Savi. Yeah.
Yeah, so look, I think there's always going to be a group that will jump to defence, right? And I do recall, I was around at that period of the Blair Peach March with the sad loss of Blair Peach all those years ago. There was a different dynamic in terms of the police, and let's not go down that route either. A lot of stuff has been built, and it's really interesting to hear that Dr. Stephen was involved in the, I guess, he can clarify this, but there was a big movement to educate the police force to be better in terms of the way they handled things. I don't think necessarily having more ethnic minority.
The prevent agenda.
The prevent, absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, I didn't want to quote how much work he's done in that area.
Muslims were very critical of prevent, weren't they? Although I know that, Steve, maybe you can come in, Steve. I know that you actually defended that because some elements of it about exposing, extremism, extremist ideologies, even giving that historical context that Savi and Sats talked about. Where is prevent now in this? I mean, here some people saying that these are terrorist offences. Is that the way forward? Is to label these young people as terrorists? Is that the way forward?
I think that the key point I would make about prevent is that there's a lot of good safeguarding work being done. Yeah, has been done under the auspices of prevent. It gets a very bad press, but there is a lot of positive work being done. Yeah. Now there's lots of problems with it as well, but there is a lot of positive work being done in steering people away from Salafi jihadism, violent forms of Islam, and the extreme right. There's a lot of really valuable work being done. I think the difficulty with the current situation is that we're not just talking about lone wolf, terrorism or extremism. We're talking about forms of action which are networked, which are connected. And I think that's what we have to understand. These ideas that these people who are rampaging around the street are motivated by are not just isolated young men in their bedrooms. They are being promoted systematically by people in positions of responsibility. Elon Musk, conservative politicians. It's a global movement. Yeah, we've got just as you noted earlier, Gernam, we've got parties across Europe, and there's an important dimension I'd like to bring into the discussion here. We are experiencing a social crisis. Now, what the extreme right do is they talk to that social crisis. They are trying to racialize problems of violence, and very often these are forms of violence against women. Let's think back to the events that took place in Southport. Yeah, this is fundamentally part of a huge social crisis of violence against women and girls. Yeah. And it's really important to understand that what the extreme right tried to do with that is they exploit the anxieties and concerns people rightly have over a terrifying incident like this, a dance class where someone turns up and starts murdering young children. Yeah, they're exploiting the violence, but they racialize it.
Yeah.
The same is true of the Rotherham grooming gangs. These issues are present because of the power of patriarchy. The patriarchy is a very active and significant.
So what do you think? I mean, do you think that, we've got a new Labour, I'm going to come to Sat as well, but now that you've raised this issue, let's just look at some of the kind of strategies. At the moment, Keir Starmer seems to be, seeing this as just as a law and order. He's been very vehement that these are racists. These are people, he's not trying to be apologetic like, say, Farage is. There's no excuse for that, and they will be punished severely. Is that music to your ears?
That's a start, but we've got to go much further than that. As I said, even the National Association of Police Chiefs recently noted that there was a social crisis of violence against women and girls. Yeah, there has been numerous murders of women taking place. There's media outrage of this, but not a particular naming of this as a problem of violence against women. And there's a wider social crisis. The extreme right are speaking to that, but in an absolutely distorted and misinformed way.
Well, let me put that question.
Is a very good example of someone who speaks into that social crisis.
Yeah, so they're just they're throwing fuel on the fire. It seems to me, there's a number of people are throwing fuel on the fire. The point is to put the fire out now. So far Starmer has been pretty firm. What is to be done? What is to be done now? Today, tomorrow. Yes, we defend communities, but what about these young people and their genuine grievances?
So what is to be done? Okay, so they do complain about refugee immigrants. We're a nation that creates refugees. We go around bombing and destroying and raping other people's nations' women. There's a long list. The US has probably not even left a single country left, to be fair, and UK, where we haven't gone and destroyed other nations. And then we complain that they come here on boats. We're the one who created them.
Okay, look, you've given us the diagnosis. You're a doctor. Give us some medicine. Give us some medicine.
So what's the answer? Don't do it. Tell your government, if you're going to go around smashing things and telling people, oh, it's the immigrants and refugees' fault, then tell your government not to go and kill other people in other nations. Stop involving yourself. Your political international policies are not benefiting us. It's only benefiting people at the top. and those people are the ones benefiting the real thing. And now, even if the riots kind of die out and everything, how do we as colored people, Asian, black, any other race, feel comfortable leaving work? I've been telling my fellow colleagues today, leaving work, make sure you're looking around your surroundings. When you're parked up on the traffic lights, don't have your windows open, even if it's hot outside. You don't know what's going to happen. People have had acid attacks
But
recently.
isn't that playing into
People
the hands? Isn't the fear is actually what they're wanting to create? That's playing into their hands, isn't it?
the fear is there, but you still have to protect yourself. You can't say
Yeah.
that we can't protect ourselves. Now, Angela Davis, who lived
Okay,
in
so I'm going to just
America.
pause you there. I'll come back to you. I will bring Angela Davis, but I've got a call. I've got Mandeep Singh Sohal on the line, and he's part of the Gurdwara Aid, who has been doing a lot of work in terms of informing the community. In fact, have been sending out lists of potential kind of flashpoints. Mandeep, I mean, just give us a bit of an update from your side. What's the kind of current situation? I mean, at the moment, it seems like it's really targeted towards Muslims and mosques, but now we've got this other one about immigration lawyers and businesses. So what's the kind of situation? How do you see the situation?
Okay. So what we've seen is, you're right, it's primarily targeting the Muslim community, and looking at mosques or areas where they are. And then the other thing is anything to do with immigration, or that any services or businesses that support immigration, there also seem to be another target at this point. The fear is that, as far as Gurdwaras are concerned, if any of these Gurdwaras are close to any of those businesses, the fear is that they won't be able to tell the difference, and that Gurdwara could also become a target at that point. But for the time being, it's just largely the Muslim community that's being targeted, and businesses that support immigration work.
So what's your advice to Gurdwara committees and the community generally? I mean, should they just stay indoors, keep out of it, or should they actually stand up, for their fellow citizens? I mean, we already heard of examples where Sikhs have, in fact, it's part of our religion to defend those that are under attack, isn't it? But, yeah.
So I think the first thing is apne Guru Ghar nu sanu samalna chahiye, just to be they're safe. That's the first thing we have to do. And we've created a document called a Gurdwara Security Plan that we're sending out to all Guru Ghars everywhere to give some recommendations, some advice, some guidance on how they can do that, especially in a situation where there's a demonstration or a riot, how they should protect the Guru Ghars. Within that document is also advice around making sure they're in contact with the local authorities, the police, the local fire service as well. Also, it's a good idea to be in touch with other local places of worship, masjid, churches, synagogues in the locality, to ensure that there's good intelligence and sharing of information and resources that might be needed.
And what about vigilantism? Because there was an attack on the Quilliam Mosque in Liverpool, which is one of the oldest mosques in this country. And actually what they did was that the people in the mosque, rather than, going for vigilantism, they actually went out to the protesters and gave them food. And by doing so, they actually, managed to build a dialogue. Where do we go? I mean, Sikhs, they have a reputation for fighting, but really we don't really want to go down that line, do we?
I think you're right. We want to avoid that as much as possible. The one issue is that if then there could be an issue there. So we've got to be careful with these things as well. The other thing that we've seen that's happening in the last few days is a lot of WhatsApp groups have sprung up of Apne Naujawan who've got together, and they are saying, patrolling and driving around Gurdwaras to see everything's okay. There was a talk about Martindale Gurdwara in Hounslow, which is very close to a demonstration point in Hounslow. We had Naujawan going to Hounslow Gurdwara just to stand outside it. So these things have happened already. They're happening now, and there are a number of very active groups in the UK which have been set up in the last few days where Naujawan.
But it should be defensive. The aim is to defend.
Correct. I mean that's what it is. The aim is to defend and to protect, not to cause anything else. So they're doing this kind of service as seva, a service which is quite commendable. But as long as they keep it in that spirit, then we should be fine.
Okay, then. Thanks, Mandeep, for that. Thank you. Stephen, what is to be done? Short, medium, and long term. I mean, I think Sat really wants a revolution, which, might not be a bad thing. We might get a revolution. Who knows what's going to happen? But really, what is to be done in the short, medium, and long term?
I mean, I think, the initiatives that the last speaker is talking about are really important. We've got to, in the short term, rebuild solidarity between communities, across communal lines, across ethnic lines, across.
What about the politics of identity? Because you and I have been writing about some of the kind of destructive, some of the dangers of the politics of identity. What about that? Do you think anti-racists now need to rethink the way they kind of do anti-racism?
Well, definitely, Gurnham. We were both active in the, I came in on the very tail end of the anti-racist movement of the 70s and 80s, and you were much more, closely involved with that. But that movement, one of the key slogans of that movement was "Black is a political color." So you sought to build solidarity across religious, ethnic divides. One of the key problems is that identity politics has isolated people and fragmented the community. Yeah, we've got to find new ways to rebuild connections between people. What we have in common, look at the social crisis the extreme right is talking into. They are talking into all the problems we have, but the problems we have affect everybody. If we look at problems of young people's mental health, these are present in all communities. The issues. If we look at problems of violence against women, these are issues that are present in all community. Insecure work. These issues are affecting working class people of all ethnic groups. Yeah.
And what about social work? Because you're a social work lecturer, and it seems to me that some of these young people, maybe not all of them, because there's no evidence that they're part of the system, but many of them will become part of a system, youth justice, and also maybe in terms of some of the kind of family crisis. Anti-racist social work has been under attack as well. I mean, is there a need for us to almost, even strengthen anti-racist social work, given the kind of situation? Or some people arguing that it's this emphasis on anti-racism, on cancel culture, on woke culture, that actually is fomenting this kind of backlash. How do we kind of square the circle there?
We've got to really learn to dialogue with each other. Yeah, we've got to have a culture of critical dialogue. Yeah, people talking to each other, not cancelling each other. Let's debate and discuss, not try and stop people speaking. Yeah, obviously there have to be limits to free speech, and as an anti-fascist, I believe there should be no platform for fascists. We've allowed that to happen. We've allowed people like Nigel Farage. I'm not saying he's a fascist, but his ideas are very close to those ideas, and we've given him a platform. We've got to rebuild solidarity, and we've got to also get our politicians and ourselves, our communities, to address the real problems we have, which are universal problems. Yeah. Okay. Healthcare, housing, cost of living. This is the social crisis the extreme right is speaking into. They have no solutions other than hatred and blame. But progressive-minded people do have genuine solutions. We can rediscover those.
Okay, I'm gonna come to Savi first, and then Savi. Stephen talks about dialogue. I mean, that's kind of what you're into with your podcasting. But other people are saying that, we've never had more opportunities to dialogue. We've got social media coming out of our ears. But
I call it the swimming pool. The swimming pool is full with every man, woman, and their dog. And there's nothing wrong with dogs having a podcast as well.
Yeah.
What I wanted to point out was, and actually, I'm not stealing your idea, Stephen. I think, Dr. Stephen, I think you were reading my notes, I think. The point about dialogue. Dialogue comes when you put an idea into place. Now, Elizabeth Day wrote a book about ideas. She said they're a little bit like floating around looking for someone to have their brains opened up and for the idea to drop in and spread out. Let's put that in a practical reality. There's a very famous film produced last year, The Old Oak. It was a very art film, spoke about Assyrian refugees that came into a particular town in the north. That particular town had voted out in terms of Brexit, and it spoke about a good news story. The good news story was they created a common kitchen where people who couldn't afford food, I'm talking about white, brown, yellow, pink, orange, purple, whatever color you are, and it all came together, and that united the community. We don't have enough of those stories in the media, whether it be social media or public media. We don't get to hear about those success stories. There seems to be something stopping that conversation from taking place. Talking about your point, Dr. Stephen, about the fact that if we have that open dialogue, we need to put the context down for that conversation to start happening. So here's a suggestion. We're talking about a good question, Dr. Kunam, the short, medium, long term. The short, well, building that solidarity is to create those conversations. Good news stories. We always hear bad news. We have sensationalism. Sensationalism drives the media, whether it be online or offline, and that is fueling, putting fire, greater fire, which will be difficult to put out. I would like to say one more thing, and that is that if you listen to Jon Snow was a presenter on Channel 4 News for quite a few years, and he made a very interesting point. He said, just because, I'm paraphrasing here, by the way, just because you're brown and you read the news, it doesn't necessarily mean that you control the agenda. Who actually chooses the news stories? Why is it when you listen to ITV, BBC, Channel 4, or Channel 5, or Sky News, it's the same news? There is no other news. It's the same rhetoric or agenda that is being pushed out. We don't get fresh perspectives. And the reason for that is maybe there's a lot of lazy researchers. I'm going to blame researchers here. Bring more people in, like the people that you brought into the conversation earlier, Professor Gurnam. They were very useful. They were talking about the things that they were doing, but they don't get a break. They don't get information in terms of all the things that are going on. So if we were to learn more about the grassroots work that is taking place, then other people will listen to it, and we will be able to destroy the noise of that other media, which is the right-wing media. So the short and the long of it is to create those conversations and put those news items into the public.
That's brilliant. Sadkaran, we know that as kind of activists and as revolutionaries, I guess, it's all about what happens on the ground. Yeah, you can go into, somebody says social theory is not going to stop the fascist. What do we do in the short term?
I think what we need to understand, I totally agree with Dr. Savi and Dr. Stephen that we need to bring out the solidarity and inform that. But over the years, name any media station, the mainstream stream media or the social media, it's always given highlights to right-wing agenda. It's over and over again. Try it. Why don't we, all four of us, try to get this information out? Let's get the solidarity information out. You won't go much far.
And that's the point.
You won't go much far.
And do we need to
the reason why
bypass social media and go out onto the streets and have dialogue? Should we be talking to those protesters?
The problem is you can't go and reason with them at the moment. The heat is too much, and the heat has given that they're not just attacking a Muslim person; they're attacking anybody who's coloured. So at the moment, what you need to do is first educate ourselves, and to think that we are well informed. Even myself, to say that I'm well informed, I couldn't be more wrong. We think that we're well informed. The books that we read, the media that we read, the scrolling that we do, it's all selective. Even the education system to the far situation. Why isn't certain books mentioned in history, like How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Dr. Rodney Walter? These kind of things are not mentioned, but other stuff is. So this is the question that we need to understand. First, we have to get well informed ourselves, and then discuss amongst our own groups. We already have Sikhs who are anti-Muslim. We need to educate them as well. Those who are participating in EDL, or even saying, it's immigrants. You're an immigrant yourself. So these kind of information, and I totally agree with Dr. Coden that there's so much more that's happening, and there's a link between this.
Let me put that to Stephen. Stephen, Sat says that we need to make more efforts on teaching about colonial history. That's your field of the history of the empire. Yet you've got people like Jordan Peterson, you've got Neil Ferguson, and a whole lot of others saying these are a pack of lies. These are woke lies that we need to teach British people to be British, and that's how we'll get cohesion. In fact, they're saying that we need to kill multiculturalism and create some kind of monoculturalism. Otherwise, we can't move forward. What do you say to that?
I hope these far right rights that we're now seeing across the UK is a wake up call to those people, because these ideas that have been nurtured and pushed forward and promoted by people like Jordan Peterson, we are now seeing the realization of those ideas in these horrific attacks on ethnic minorities. So it is really about a wider project.
But the point is, I mentioned Neil Ferguson as well, about how we teach British history. I mean, we would argue that we need to teach it warts and all. But there are other arguments saying that you do that and you create tensions and conflicts. Let the kind of histories. We need to put a positive spin on being British. What about that argument? I'll come back to you, Sam, but let me. Yeah,
it's absolutely essential. We can't progress towards that positive view until we first of all acknowledge what's happened. Just as a white Australian, we can't progress in Australia to a genuinely equal society until we acknowledge the colonization of the Indigenous people, their land stolen from them, their people treated absolutely as though they were non-human and subhuman. This is part of the whole history of empires. So there's a pedagogical, there's an educational dimension, which also involves telling a positive story about migration. Yeah.
Okay. So let me come back to that on that.
Area the politicians have really retreated from.
Let me come back to Sat. I mean, we will agree upon that. We need to teach history. In a balanced way, in the ways in which we can record some of the positive that European Enlightenment tradition has given to the world, but also some of the horrors of Enlightenment. But let me ask you, let me put this question to you. If you say that there are multiple histories, some postmodernists would say that, then you legitimize the arguments of fundamentalists who say, well, that's your version. This is how we think women should be treated. So how do you kind of balance this? It's back to multiculturalism. Who is the arbiter of what is culturally acceptable or not?
The thing is, when we talk about history, when we say there's a balanced history, I'm sorry, there's no balanced history between the oppressor and the oppressed. There's always, there's always try an event, for example, the Jallianwala Bagh, that was a complete genocide from the British Empire.
But Neil Ferguson would say that history is about winners and losers. That's what Ferguson argues. And so the empire was about the West taking these lands. But so what? He says that's part of human nature.
I wouldn't agree with this of human nature. Even our faith tale tells us that is not human nature. And psychologists also tell you that we work in social gatherings, and that's science for you. That's why Jordan Peterson, who says that, oh no, it's all individualism, that's where we should be going. No, anything that humans have ever achieved is with being collectively together as united. No matter if you're from a different race, different culture, that's what's shown in history, and that's what the reality is. And when we say we want to teach people, not just the history, we should be teaching them reality. 0.18% refugees are the number figures that actually come into the UK. And as one of our speakers, I'm not sure who it was, said that actually the boats, I think it was Dr. Savi who said that he sent you some information, that the boats are actually reduced in immigration over the years. Yeah. And if any funding has been taken, £37.50 per week is taken from the government. And what about the millions and millions that we use to kill other people in other nations? And what about the millions that the taxpayer, the people at the top who's supposed to be paying, but they don't pay? But we then what this right-wing movement has done now, and which I have seen from within my own eyes and ears, is that we're blaming people who take benefits now. So the people who are collective or benefits, they are the targets. Oh, they don't know anything. They will get benefits. I'm sorry, it's not like that. Okay. And that's what we teach. And also, one point before I go, we're always saying that it's the Muslims who do the grooming gangs. And the last time I think I did a show on one of the radio stations in 2015, 2016. I'm not sure the numbers are still correct, but the Home Office declared it's actually white British who have the more gangs in human trafficking and raping culture. So it's more ideal.
Let's not get into kind of
be teaching this stuff.
They're both bad. But Savi, we've got another.
One's bad or not the other.
I don't want to get into a numbers game in that sense. But Savi, we're looking at how we can move forward, and it's a very complex situation. I mean, I think we're all hoping that this will die out. Yeah, that the fires will kind of die out, and then hopefully that will then create an opportunity for us to have a conversation. What's really interesting, if you think we started the program by reflecting back on the 70s, what happened in Brixton and other places, but that was essentially about black people uprising, yeah, aggrieved black minorities, and it was against the police. It seems to be completely bizarre now. You've got white people uprising, and it's the police who are being attacked. It's almost like a kind of parallel universe. Is that a sign of progress, or how do we make sense of this?
I think the important thing is you're talking about making sense of it. You're trying to create reason around a situation that has no reason, right? So you're trying to apply logic to someone who's doing something illogically.
Yeah.
If you look at basic human traits, you're going to find something to hate somebody about, unfortunately. If it, and I know I'm going to jest a little bit, but in a good old Star Trek, the original series, Captain Kirk arrives on a planet, and the top half of the planet happened to have black on one side and white on the other, and it was reversed on the bottom half. And why he sorts it all out, because they're in conflict, and they're flying off, and they had this little banter at the end of the program, and they said, well, it's great that you sorted it out, Captain Kirk. And I think Spock turns around and says, well, if it wasn't the fact that it was skin color, we would start discriminating against eye color. We know and we recognize that there is differences. And I'm a big music fan, and I have to tell you that, isn't it great that you go to a concert, any type of music, you'll have 5 or 6 different types of instruments, and they create a perfect harmony, and they create something of value. And that's what's missing, the creation of value, the creation of people coming together. And often you find if that different communities come together for a common cause, like, for example, poverty, for example, conflict in a particular country, when you start to clarify what unites us, it is very hard for those who want to divide us. Right. And I think that comes in stories, and we don't have enough people coming to the fore to talk about those stories. I just wanted to correct one point, actually, not correct, but just point out further what Dr. Sakharan was saying. He was talking about Jallianwala Bagh. Well, Jallianwala Bagh should not be down the route of deniers. There were thousands of people who died there, not hundreds. And you have people in authority, like I believe
that they were just hundreds.
Prince Philip, who turned up, or somebody turned up and said, "Oh, it was only a couple of hundred people." The fact that it wasn't just a couple of hundred people, you had General Dyer shooting across Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar for a legitimate freedom movement that was taking place. Now, my great-grandfather is a survivor in 1919 of that particular event, and there's no denying the fact that the number of people who had to jump into wells to try and survive, some of them died in the wells, and some of them managed to get out alive. Facts are facts. Information is information. We cannot have a situation where
history needs to get to the curriculum.
History needs to be clarified, and it needs to be confirmed. It needs to be communicated. It needs to make sure that it's part of a curriculum, so that it's clear that even when you're growing up and you're 4 years old or 3 years old, you have a very clear curriculum, defined information that tells you the truth. Right. And it's only when we start at that grassroots level, we will, and that's the long-term strategy. The short-term strategy, can we have some good news for a change? How communities are making a difference? And I think that's the way we're going to solve it. Just wanted to answer your question, the other part of it. Now, you think they're going to simmer down, but the underlying current of frustration is the real question. How do we address that? How do we make sure that governments are responsible to communicate clear information, just as Dr. Sakharan was saying, and the information that I sent you earlier on about the fact that the number of migrants coming over in boats is not as big. The issue is, if we had a policy of making them not just wait, but also contribute and pay taxes and respecting them, not want to shoot them down or go to a hotel and try and smash them up.
Problem is, Savi, some of these people, I mean, there's a sense that social media undermined any authority. We're in a kind of Kafkaesque world, really, where, like people just kind of like making things up and they're justified. Maybe it's a postmodernist kind of world that, we've got. But Stephen, Savi talks about missing bits. There seems to be a huge missing bit, which kind of picks up from Sakharan's point, that the left is non-existent at the moment. It's kind of, unless you think the Labour Party is the left, does the left need to reorganize and get into those communities? Because in the past, the working men's clubs, the kind of trades councils, the guilds, there's a collapse in those white working class communities where maybe you could get that political education. Do we need
Definitely,
the left?
that's absolutely right, Gurnham. I mean, if you look at Ashfield, the constituency that Lee Anderson won, and let's think about Lee Anderson's father was a striking miner.
Yeah.
He's now one of the leading figures of the right. That shows us the way that trade union consciousness and organization has disappeared in that community. A friend of mine recently told me that Ashfield, Lee Anderson's constituency, is a no-go area for Black and Asian people. That shows you that when the left weakens and collapses, racists can fill that vacuum. Racists like Lee Anderson fill that vacuum. I also want to pick up a point that Savvy made about the need for good news. And I think I'm so pleased to hear him talking about Ken Loach's film Old Oak, which is an absolutely wonderful and inspiring film and just gives us that sense of solidarity across those boundaries. But in the time when we've been broadcasting, a political comrade of mine who's been active out on the streets, taking a stand against the fascists in Newcastle, has given us some good news. And she says in this message, we were thousands strong in the West End of Newcastle. The racists all turned round and went home.
Wow.
I want to read more good news stories like that. We've got to rediscover that kind of solidarity, and that is the politics of the left.
But on what basis is that solidarity going to emerge? I mean, in the past, it would have been on class solidarity. I mean, do we need to resurrect class solidarity, or on what basis?
Class is really important, but we need to think about we essentially need. Human rights is the bottom line. Yeah. States themselves aren't upholding human rights, but we need to rediscover a grassroots, bottom-up form of human rights based on solidarity and compassion. Yeah, that's so important. We need to hear those different stories, the stories of those people who've had those desperate and dangerous journeys, these huge, traveling in trucks and tramping through forests, and then to turn around and persecute and blame those people. If people really knew those stories, they wouldn't be able to hate, just as Savvy was saying.
Well, one of the stories,
solidarity is the antidote to hate.
Yeah. Well, one of the kind of things that seems to be unifying people is the defense of the NHS. Yeah. And there's an irony here because, over 30% of the NHS is staffed by migrants and doctors and people like yourself. So you've got this irony where these thugs may well be trying to burn down some kind of hostel for migrants in the evening, and in the morning they might end up as one of your patients.
Absolutely. And to say that the NHS is protected, well, we just had the doctors' strikes and we had nurses' strikes. We had so many people striking. I know the BMA recently said that we will have a discussion and accepted the government's proposal of the pay rise, but it's not pay reduction, and so a lot of doctors may vote against that. But the bottom line is,
professionals have a really important role, don't they? I mentioned social workers. You reach out into those communities, don't you? You actually, but.
Yes. So we do. It's not like we don't treat them. Of course, we treat them. We don't look at this person is a fascist or a racist. We're not going to treat them. We treat them as a human being. So we do treat them. But the hospitals now have given out rules and regulations that if someone is trying to be harmful for you, you leave the scenario. You leave from that zone. You don't want to get hurt. Your first self safety is there. But when they're hurt, they've got a broken arm or a broken leg. They will need medical attention and they will take it. But the bottom line of what we're going to do now, yes, we should be speaking to each other. We should. And guess what? What's going to happen when we start talking about our problems or getting together just for a meal and stuff? class consciousness will gain. It's inevitable. You can't sit there and not talk about the economical problems that you're facing. You can't talk about the inflation rates. You can't talk about, oh, I'm not getting a GP appointment not because of immigrants, but actually it's because of the policies that this country has made, and the governments have made these policies where doctors are leaving this country and we're not funding enough for doctors to stay in this country. And the same goes for any other institution, be it social housing, be it for the schools, be it for anything. Policing, hospitals, any infrastructure. We had libraries closed down. We had prisons closed down. So even these people who are going to get arrested, where are they going to actually go? And are they going to be released again? The same way some criminals have been
we are
released?
now out of time. I'm afraid I've just got a signal from the studio, but I'm going to give each one of you literally 30 seconds each. So I'll start off with you, Stephen. 30 seconds. What final message would you like to give to our viewers?
We've got to recover a sense of solidarity and rebuild our public institutions. That's absolutely crucial. Okay. And we've got to collectively address the problems we have about violence, about mental health, about poor housing, about inequality, about low wages. Okay. We've got to reconstruct and rebuild solidarity.
Savi, literally 3 bullet points.
3 bullet points. I'm going to give you some homework for people very quick reads. Benjamin Zephaniah, who recently died, he wrote a great book called The Refugee Boy. It's a very quick read. It talks about the life of a particular child who came over and how he had to suffer in some of the hostels and the tragedy is that. Another one that has been written by somebody that's looking after a lot of the refugees that are coming over. She's an outstanding author. The book is called The Boy at the Back of the Classroom, right? And again, that talks about, the social injustice that's happening right now. Yeah. So my bullet points, I've got my 10 seconds left, are going to be more good news. Think about how we can talk about all the great things that we're doing as a community. Yep. So if you do meet somebody in the street, talk about that, talk about history, talk about heritage, and then you get more respect that way. And do your homework by reading more and referring more books. Princess Sophia is a great book. Lots of great texts out there.
Okay. So you've got 1 bullet point. 1 bullet point.
With the addition to everything else that everybody has said on this show, I think also looking at the true face of fascism as well as the right-wing politics, it's not them, it's someone else. And we need to dig deeper, understand that political policy and destroy it, to be fair.
That's great. And I agree with all of your remedies. So I've got nothing else to add. I think I just want to thank all 3 of you, Dr. Savira, Dr. Stephen Coward and Dr. Satgarden Sherry. I think we've had a really good deep dive and hopefully, this has been an educational discussion, which is what the Sikh Think Tank is all about. And, we will follow this up as well. Maybe, in a few weeks' time, we can see what's happening on the ground. But thanks to the channel as well for giving us this time. And, we will see you again on another show. So thank you.